I'm not the impressionable type. After 20-odd years of driving the roads of the United States, I've seen too much to be barely shaken. But there was one night, crossing the interior of Oregon, that affected me in a way that to this day I can't explain. It was a simple route, crossing a mountainous region that was usually peaceful despite the isolation. Everything was normal until, shortly after 2 in the morning, the fog appeared. It was unusual for that time of year, and there was no sign of strong humidity in the air. But it came out of nowhere. Dense, white, thick. It looked like milk covering the road. I reduced the speed. I turned on the daylight, which barely penetrated that white wall. Everything was silent. Even the sound of the engine seemed muffled, as if the world had been wrapped in a thick blanket. It was then that I saw it. A man standing on the right side of the track, completely motionless, enveloped in that fog. From a distance, you could see that he was wearing something like a long coat or a cape. The strange thing is that he didn't signal anything. He didn't wave. He was just there, standing still, looking ahead. And the worst part, he didn't seem surprised to see me. It seemed to be waiting for me. I narrowed it down, trying to understand if it was someone who needed help or some lost crazy person. But as I got closer, I felt something I had never felt before on the road. A weight in the air, as if time had slowed down. The hairs on my arms stood up before I even saw the details. And when I passed him, I saw his face clearly. Or what should be one. The eyes were completely black, without shine, without reflection, like two empty holes. And the smile. God, that smile. It was too wide, stretched out in a way that wasn't human. A smile that looked like it had been drawn with a knife. Instinctively, I looked away and sped up. But panic had already set in. I felt like I was being watched, even kilometers later. I looked in the mirrors and swore I saw something moving in the fog. The road seemed to never end. The fog did not dissipate. And for some reason, my entire body told me that if I stopped the truck, even for a second, that man, or whatever it was going to be there, waiting for me by the door. I continued driving, trying to stay focused, but with each turn the feeling got worse. It was as if the fog was closing in around me, pushing me back to that spot where I saw the man. I looked at the GPS and realized that the position was locked. It showed that I was still on the same stretch of road as 20 minutes ago. Even after passing several milestones, the tracker would not update. The clock on the dashboard also didn't move. 2:13 a.m. Ever since I saw that man, time had frozen. It was then that I realized, I was no longer on an ordinary trip. That was something else. Another place. The radio started to crackle. First soft, then louder, as if someone was trying to tune in to a station that doesn't exist. Amidst the static, I heard a whispered voice. I didn't understand everything, but it seemed to repeat the same thing, look behind you. The phrase was repeated, interspersed with metallic noises. Look back. I crashed. Your hands on the steering wheel are sweaty, your body is cold. I didn't look. I refused. But I felt something approaching the cabin, like a presence stuck to the back of my neck. Even the interior mirror seemed to vibrate. It was then that I felt hot, rotten breath in my left ear, as if someone was leaning there. I screamed, pulled the steering wheel to the side of the road and stopped abruptly. I ran out of the truck, in the fog, tripping on the gravel on the bank. I walked around the vehicle, looked underneath, in the cargo compartment, on the road, nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the feeling of being watched continued. I grabbed the truck's radio, tried to call any other driver, anyone. Just static. That's when I looked ahead again, and there he was. The man. standing in the middle of the road, the same way as before. But now closer. Sharper. And with the same inhuman smile on his face. I didn't think. I got into the truck, locked the doors and drove off. Without looking at anything. Just speeding up like my life depended on it. And maybe it really did depend. Because when I finally came out of the fog, after more than an hour, the GPS suddenly updated. I was almost 300 kilometers ahead, on a stretch of road I had never been on. The dashboard clock jumped straight to 5:22 in the morning. And the road, finally, seemed normal. But the smell in the cabin, the smell was still there. An odor of burnt flesh, sweet and rotting, permeated the fabric of the passenger seat. As if something had been there with me. I spent the next few days trying to understand what happened. I took the truck in for inspection, thinking it could have been an outbreak due to monoxide, lack of sleep, something. But the sensors were normal, with no record of failure. No electrical failures. And the strangest thing, the fabric on the passenger seat, even after cleaning, kept that smell. I even changed the upholstery, and even then the smell returned, light, but present, especially at night. As if it had been impregnated with something that is not physical. I told an older colleague on the road, and he just said to me, "Did you see the man in the fog? There are people who never come back the same after that." I started researching. I found some lost reports on old forums, some on Reddit, others on forgotten blogs. Everyone talked about a man standing on the road at dawn, shrouded in fog, always with a strange smile and completely black eyes. In some cases, it appears on sharp curves, in others, in the middle of long, empty straights. But always the same way, standing still, waiting. And whoever stops, whoever looks too much, disappears. One of the reports said that the man is a marker. A type of entity that chooses people who cross the wrong path at the wrong time. After that, I started to avoid driving at dawn, especially in mountainous and isolated areas. But the real fear isn't of seeing him again. It's about not seeing it, but knowing it's there. Sometimes, out of the blue, my dashboard starts flashing at 2:13 a.m., even in the middle of the day. The radio hisses, even when turned off. And the smell, that sweet, rotten smell, comes back without warning. As if the fog was coming again. As if I were returning to that road, even though I was in another place. And part of me believes that once you see that man, you never fully come out of the fog. So if one day, in the middle of the night, you are driving and the fog appears out of nowhere, be alert. And if you see someone standing on the side of the road, alone, motionless, with a too wide smile on their face, don't stop. Don't look too long. Because it could be the man in the fog. And if so, maybe you can get out. But you'll never drive alone again. I've been through a lot of strange things on the roads, but there are certain situations that don't scare you immediately, they just leave a bad feeling stuck in your skin. It happened to me in 2020, on a night trip through the interior of Kentucky, crossing a rural route that cuts through plantations and passes almost abandoned villages. It was one of those nights where everything seems darker than it should be, even with the high beams on. The sky was clear, without clouds, but the air seemed heavier than normal. I was alone, as always, listening to the AM radio softly just to have some company. That's when I saw the girl. She was on the side of the road, standing still, wearing light white clothing, like a dress or nightgown, difficult to tell precisely in the darkness. What caught my attention was the fact that she was completely still. He didn't even move with the wind, nor look around. He was just there, standing, with his arms at his sides, staring at the road. I slowed down reflexively. It was a very isolated part of the route, it didn't make sense for someone to be there at that time, alone, without a suitcase, without a flashlight, without anything. When I got closer, she took a step forward, as if asking for a ride. Instantly, my stomach turned. Something about that scene was wrong. It wasn't just the fact that it was strange. It was as if her body was unmoored. The way she stood, as if she didn't belong in that space. I couldn't see her face properly, but I had the impression that she was looking me straight in the eyes, even with the windshield between us. My body reacted before my mind. I sped up. I drove straight past, trying not to look in the rearview mirror. But I couldn't help it. When I looked, she was still there. Stop. Without moving a muscle. And for some reason, I was sure that if I had stopped, I wouldn't be telling this story anymore. I moved on with my heart racing. There was no cell phone signal in that area, so there was no way to call anyone or check if there was any incident in the area. All I could do was run and get out of that section as quickly as possible. When I arrived at the next gas station, it was almost dawn. I went straight to the cashier and talked to the gas station attendant, just to take the weight off my mind. And that's when he looked at me seriously and said, "You saw her, right? The one on the road." I froze. He continued, "You were right not to stop. There have been people who stopped. And they didn't come back." I sat on the bench in the gas station's cafeteria, still shaking. The gas station attendant pulled up a chair, sat on the other side of the table and started counting. He said that, in recent months, at least 3 drivers had reported the same thing, a woman alone, on the side of a rural road, always around 2 or 3 in the morning. They all described the same appearance: white clothes, hard to see face, strange behavior. But 2 of them stopped. And they didn't reach their destination. One disappeared completely. The truck was found empty on a secondary road. The other appeared days later, disoriented, without remembering anything, walking through a plantation. The strangest thing is that, according to him, the authorities treat everything as an isolated case. There was never a deep investigation. And the few who tried to film or photograph the woman said that the devices crashed or that the images simply disappeared afterwards. "There's something on that road," he said. "I don't know if it's human." But what he said next was what really chilled me. Apparently, there had been an attempted robbery in that same area weeks before. A group would be using a woman as bait. But the description of the clothes and behavior didn't match. One of the arrested suspects stated that the woman was not part of the group. And that she appeared to them too. I went back to the truck not knowing what to think. The story was too absurd to be just a coincidence, but too real to be just a legend. I started the engine, but I stopped for a few minutes, mentally reviewing what had happened. That woman didn't seem scared, she didn't seem desperate. She seemed to know exactly where she was. And, most disturbingly, he seemed to know I was going to be there. As if everything was already programmed. Since then, every time I pass by a deserted road and see someone asking for a ride, my body reacts before my mind. No matter who it is, I move on. And it's not just fear. It's instinct. It's that feeling that only those who have been through something like this understand. And the truth is, sometimes danger on the road doesn't come from ghosts or monsters. It comes from what is almost human, but is not. Of what watches you in the dark, stopped, motionless, waiting for you to slow down. And if you give it space, if you let doubt in, it may never leave. After that night, I started asking around at other gas stations in the region. Always discreetly, without seeming crazy. And, every now and then, someone would say, "I've heard of it," or, "A guy mentioned something like that last month." Nobody wanted to delve deeper into the subject. It was as if everyone knew, but avoided talking so as not to attract that again. An older truck driver I met at a gas station in Paducah pulled me aside when he heard the story. He said, I saw her in 1989. Same place. And she hasn't aged a day since. That stopped me. He was serious. With the look of someone who has carried that image for decades. From that point on, I started avoiding nighttime travel on rural routes, especially in that region. And even now, years later, if I hear about a missing truck driver in Kentucky, I think of her. Because, deep down, I know she's still there. Waiting. The same posture. The same outfit. The same emptiness in the eyes. Maybe it's not even a person. Maybe it's something old, using that image as a mask. A trap disguised as fragility. And the most terrifying thing is knowing that, to anyone who looks quickly, it looks like just another young woman in need of help. Time has passed, but the weight of that night still accompanies me. Especially when I'm driving in silence, in the early hours of the morning. There was a time when I saw a shadow on the side of the road and my body reacted before I understood. Your hands are on the steering wheel, your foot is on the accelerator. Because we can't trust what we see at night. Even more so when it seems too human to be there. And the worst thing is knowing that, at some point, someone will stop. Whether out of pity, tiredness, or not knowing the story. And when it stops, she will smile. So, if one day you're cruising through rural Kentucky in the early hours of the morning, and you see a woman alone on the side of the road, wearing light-colored clothes, expressionless, don't stop. No matter how much she seems to need it, no matter how much her heart tells her to help, keep going. Because if you stop, maybe you'll find out what's really behind that face. And you may never be able to get off the road again. This happened early one morning in the interior of New Mexico, in 2017. I was almost out of gas and had no GPS signal, so I decided to leave the main route when I saw a makeshift sign indicating a gas station 12 miles away. The dirt road took me to what seemed to be a forgotten little town, one of those that no longer appears on the map. Everything turned off, no living soul on the street, no house with lights on. Just a building at the top of a hill with bright windows, an old church, made of dark wood, with a large cross on the facade and a thin tower in the center. Desperate for help, I went there. I parked the truck at the end of the street and walked to the church. The front door was ajar, and we could hear a muffled sound from inside, voices, a kind of unison chant, slow, like an ancient prayer. I knocked lightly, trying to attract attention, but no one responded. I pushed the door slowly, and what I saw stopped me. The place was full. Pews occupied by people wearing red tunics, all facing the altar, where a larger, hooded figure led the cult. But the strange thing is that no one seemed to notice me. Not even a glance in my direction. As if I were invisible. The high ceiling of the church made the sound echo, and the candles on the altar flickered with a slight draft coming from the bottom. I smelled strong incense, but there was another odor underneath, something bitter, more raw. I started taking 2 steps back, my whole body telling me to get out of there. That's when I noticed, what looked like a cross in the background, behind the altar, wasn't really a cross. It was something, twisted. A kind of structure made of bones and wire, with hanging symbols that seemed to move on their own. And at that moment, the prayer stopped. The silence was absolute, as if time had frozen. And at the same time, everyone, absolutely everyone, turned their heads in my direction. All at once. As if they already knew I was there. Their eyes were glassy, sunken, as if there was no real life behind them. The leader slowly took off his hood, revealing an eyebrowless, pale face, and smiled a smile that seemed wrong, too wide. "You're early, hiker," he said. And then I knew, this was no ordinary cult. And I was not welcome. My body froze, but my mind screamed to run. I turned around and left the church as quickly as I could, listening to the sound of pews being dragged behind me. They had risen. They were coming. I ran to the truck, almost tripping over the gravel in the street. When I slammed the door and turned the key, the engine failed. 1, 2, 3 times. On Wednesday, he called with a desperate snore. I turned on the headlights and saw, in the rearview mirror, dozens of them leaving the church in silence, walking slowly towards me. They didn't run. They didn't scream. It was worse this way. That calculated calm made it feel like no matter what I did, they knew they would catch up to me. I accelerated with all my might, trying to return along the same dirt road where I entered. But the city felt different. The streets were narrower, and the houses seemed to have moved. As if the place was reconfiguring itself to keep me inside. The GPS still had no signal, the radio just hissed. Every time I turned a corner, I swore I'd see the church tower again, even though I hadn't turned around. It was like a maze. A trap. And to make matters worse, I started to hear a sound coming from inside the bodywork, as if something was scratching inside, trying to get out. On my third attempt to leave the city, I saw a child standing in the middle of the street, also wearing a red tunic, looking straight at my headlights. I had to swerve, I almost threw the truck into a fence. And when I looked back, she wasn't there anymore. As if it had never been. I felt my stomach drop. My head throbbed. The church, the leader's voice, the smell of burning incense, everything came back in flashes. It was as if a part of me was still inside, trapped. Only when I saw a familiar road sign, dirty and worn, did I realize she had left. That it had let me out. I drove for another hour without stopping, without thinking. I just wanted distance. When I stopped at a gas station with cell phone reception, I tried to look for the name of the town I saw on the sign before entering, Sable Creek. Nothing appeared. No photos, no records. As if that place had been erased from all maps. I just found an old thread on an obscure forum, where a truck driver mentioned something similar, a church at the end of the street, lights on, and people who didn't look exactly human. The post ended with a sentence that stuck with me forever: if you saw the cross of bones, it's because they were already waiting for you. I never went back to New Mexico after that night. To this day I don't know if what I saw was real or if I ended up in some kind of gap in reality, where the rules don't apply. But I know what I felt. And I know I left there different. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the truck, I hear whispers coming from the radio, even though it's turned off. Voices repeating that phrase, "You're here early, hiker." And in some early mornings, for no reason, the smell of incense returns. Out of nowhere. As if they were still watching me. Waiting for the right moment to call me back. I've had nightmares about that cross made of bones, with the empty eyes of those faithful. In one of them, I was standing at the church door again, but this time, I was going inside. And the scariest thing is that, in the dream, I didn't feel scared. I felt belonging. As if part of me knew this was inevitable. That city doesn't appear by chance. That the road leads there when the time comes. Since then, every time I pass by an unfamiliar road and see a church lit up in a place where there shouldn't be anything, I don't stop. I don't face it. I don't look twice. The story I told here is not a warning. It's a record. Because if you also come across Sable Creek or any place that seems forgotten by everyone, think twice before entering. Not every light in a city that is turned off is a sign of help. Sometimes it's an invitation. And sometimes, the cult isn't waiting for a new member, it's waiting for an old one to return. And when that happens, there's no point in GPS, radio, or horn. The road closes. And all that's left is to pray that they let you out. As they left it to me, for now. So, if you're on a strange route, and you see a lit church where there should only be grass and silence, don't go in. Don't knock on the door. Because maybe, on the other side, they already know your name. And maybe this time they won't let you go. It was just supposed to be a quick stop. I was on my way to Reno, crossing I-80, when I decided to stop at one of those small roadside stations, just to use the bathroom and have a coffee before continuing my journey. It was still dark, around 3 in the morning, and the place was almost empty, just a parked car and an old truck in the other corner of the parking lot. I parked my truck in front of the convenience store, turned off the engine and stayed in silence for a few minutes, enjoying that moment of rest. That's when I saw it. In the side mirror, in the reflection of the store door, there was a man standing behind the booth. In the reflection, he appeared tall, thin, with a dark jacket and his face half covered in shadows. I looked at it for a few seconds, thinking that maybe it was the driver of the other truck, but something there bothered me. He was standing too still. Property. And the way his body jutted out in the reflection felt wrong. As if the image did not follow the normal rules of light. I immediately turned to look out the window. Nothing. Absolutely no one behind the truck. I thought he might have hidden or left quickly, so I went down to check. I went all the way around the truck. I looked underneath, I looked at the other side of the gas station. All empty. Even the convenience store door was still closed. I went in, bought a coffee, exchanged a few words with the cashier and went back to the truck trying to forget about it. But when I started the engine and looked in the rearview mirror again, he was there. Same place. Same reflection. His face was still hidden by the shadow, only this time, his head was slightly tilted. As if he was watching me. I stopped. I stared at the mirror, trying to understand. So I turned around again, quickly, to try to catch him in the act. But, of course, the space behind the cabin was empty. The worst came when I looked at the interior mirror, the one that covers part of the bed at the back of the cabin. He was there too. Reflected, standing at the back, even though I didn't really see anyone. The body didn't react, but my mind screamed to get out of there. I grabbed the key, started the car and left the gas station as quickly as I could. I drove for about 30 minutes, just trying to focus on the road. But the problem is, every time I looked in the rearview mirror, it was still there. The same reflection. The same figure standing behind the truck. As if the mirror had recorded that presence. Or worse, as if she had come with me. I tried to convince myself that it was tiredness, a hallucination from driving too much. But I've spent entire nights without sleeping and I've never experienced anything like this. I started avoiding looking directly in mirrors. Every time I passed a car or saw a reflection in a window, I looked away. But still, he showed up. In the corner of your eye. Always still, always watching me, never really present. There was a moment when I stopped at a traffic light in a larger city, and saw the figure reflected in the bodywork of the truck next to me. He was closer. Much more. It appeared to be right behind the passenger seat. This made me despair. I parked the truck at a larger station, one of those with a rest area and shower, and I stood in the cabin, not knowing what to do. I decided to cover the mirrors with tape and an emergency drop cloth I carried. I thought this would help, and in a way it did. It stopped appearing. But that night, when I went to bed, I saw his silhouette reflected in the small, dark screen of the off radio. That's when I understood, it wasn't just the mirror. It was any reflective surface. Anything that could give me back my image. I could give him back too. I spent days driving with all the mirrors covered. One of the company's colleagues called me asking if I had hit my head, because it wasn't safe. But I would rather take a risk on the road than continue seeing that. Even so, the figure never truly went away. Sometimes, when I park the truck near a storefront or public restroom, I see it there, at a glance. Always stopped. Always at the same angle. As if he was stuck in that reflection, waiting for the right time. And the worst part is that, over time, he started to change. Now, when I see your reflection, your face is more visible. Still dark, but with features that look like me. As if I were molding myself into my image. The smile is what scares me the most. It's a half smile, almost mocking. A reflection that doesn't copy me, but watches me. And I know that the day he smiles completely, maybe that's the moment he'll step out of the mirror. And take my place. These days, I avoid all mirrors. In my truck, everything that reflects is covered: rear view mirrors, polished surfaces, even the GPS screen I leave at minimum brightness. It's like living running away from your own shadow, but I learned that it's either that or face what's on the other side. I've tried to film, take photos, register in some way, but it doesn't work. The image never appears. The reflection is mine alone. Only I see. And maybe that's the point. Maybe what's following me only exists for me. Or maybe I'm the only one next on the list. Because, reading some reports on the internet, I found people describing similar things. And they all end up disappearing. Truly disappearing. There was a report, lost in an old forum, from a guy who said that his reflection started to respond before he did. First with expressions, then with movements. He wrote that one day the reflection smiled, and he didn't. Shortly after, he never posted anything again. That stuck in my head. Because sometimes, when I'm distracted, I see my reflection blinking at the wrong time. Or moving a little after me. Like a split-second delay. Small enough to look like a mistake. But big enough to chill the blood. Whether this is an entity, a curse, a hallucination, or just the wear and tear of the road, I don't know. But there's one rule that I follow with more faith than anything: never stare for too long. Because there is something there, on the other side of the glass, that is trying to learn. Copy. And when you know enough, you'll want to leave. And if that happens, I don't know what's left of me. Or if there's anything left. The road takes its toll. And sometimes it charges with things that don't bleed. So if one day you stop at a gas station in the early hours of the morning, and notice a reflection that doesn't match, if you see a figure standing where there is no one, keep going. Don't stare. Don't question. And for the love of God, don't smile back. It was supposed to be another peaceful morning on the road. I was crossing the border between Oklahoma and Texas, with a light truck, good weather, almost no traffic. The CB radio was on as always, just to have some company, listening to random conversations from other drivers and trying to shake off sleep. His voice came out of nowhere. There was no interference, there was no hiss. He just came straight in, clear, as if he were in the next lane. "Roger, this is Jimmy, are you in the area?" My entire body seized up. Because I knew that voice. I knew it very well. Jimmy was my friend. One of the best I've had on the road. But he died in 2013. In an accident on I-40. I went to the wake. I saw the closed coffin. And yet, the voice was his. I was silent. The hand on the CB microphone shaking. The voice repeated, "Roger, I need help." The brake failed. I'm near the turnoff, the one near Weatherford. Exactly where he died. Exactly how. It was on a poorly marked curve, where his truck overturned and caught fire. everything recorded. Everything ended years ago. And now, out of nowhere, this voice calling me for help, as if it were still there, trying to avoid the end. I pressed the radio button, my throat dry. Jimmy? Are you kidding me? This is some recording, who's making this? Silence. For a minute, just the sound of the engine and the wind. Then he replied, in a weaker voice, I thought you would come. At that moment, I felt a tightness in my chest as if I had lost him again. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was someone with a similar voice. Maybe some interference, some old signal stuck in the air, I don't know. But deep down, I knew. That intonation, that way of speaking, it could only be him. I took the road towards that curve, even though I wasn't sure what I was doing. I just know I needed to see it. When I got close, I slowed down and parked on the shoulder. The place was empty. Too silent. And then, in the side mirror, I saw a truck parked in the valley below the track where Jimmy fell years ago. But no accident had been reported that night. I went down with the flashlight, heart racing, and went to the edge of the cliff. Below, among the bushes, I saw the outline of what looked like a truck, but it wasn't recent. It was covered in rust and vegetation. The same model that Jimmy drove. And when I shined the flashlight in the windshield, I swear to God I saw someone inside. A figure in the cabin, motionless. I blinked. The light flickered. And the figure disappeared. The truck also looked less real. Like a memory clinging to the floor. Like an echo of what happened there. And the CB radio, even though it was turned off, whispered once again, I just wish someone had come. I stood there for a time that I don't know how to measure. The air seemed heavier, as if that curve held the frozen moment of a past that was still breathing. I climbed back into the truck feeling like I had invaded something I shouldn't have. But I also felt like I needed to go. It was as if he was still waiting for someone that night, stuck at that point on the road. When I started the truck again, the CB squeaked again on its own. But there was no one talking. Just dense, continuous static, like a low lament. Almost like a distant engine trying to run without fuel. At the next gas station, I decided to talk to an old attendant, one of those who know everything about the road. I asked if he remembered Jimmy's accident and he confirmed. He said that many people, for years, avoided that curve. But lately, some truck drivers have commented on strange things. Voices on the CB, interference exactly at that point, some even said they heard calls for help. It's always around 3 in the morning, he said. And it's always the same part. Some think it's just the echo of the radio picking up a dead signal. Others say it's more than that. I didn't need to hear any more. I already knew where I fit in. Back in the truck, I started paying more attention to the CB. Every night at the same time I heard static. Sometimes a low voice. Never as clear as that first one. But always similar. As if he was trying to repeat the call. As if that night was happening all over again, stuck in a loop. One detail haunts me to this day. The last time I heard the voice clearly, he said something I never told anyone. An old nickname, which only he used with me. When I heard that, I immediately understood that it was not a coincidence. It wasn't a lost signal. It was him. Since then, I have carried a different weight with me. A radio that was never the same again. A curve that I will never pass without reducing again. And a memory that doesn't want to die. I don't know if Jimmy is stuck in this place. I don't know if that call was for me, or for anyone who wanted to listen. But if one day, in the middle of the night, you're alone on the road and CB chirps out of nowhere, listen. And if anyone asks for help near Weatherford, he responds. Because it could just be interference. Or it could be someone who is still waiting for a friend who never arrived. It's been a few years since that early morning, and even now, when I'm riding alone, sometimes the CB still squeaks out of nowhere. Never with the same clarity, but the frequency of that voice keeps coming back from time to time, as if testing whether anyone is still listening. One night, another truck driver told me he heard a similar call, same turn, same time. He didn't know Jimmy's story, but he described the voice accurately. When I said the name, the guy turned pale. "So it's him?" he asked. I just shook my head. It's him. And deep down, we knew. The road holds what we cannot leave behind. There's something about that frequency. Something between CB noises that carries more than signal. Charger. Carries regret. It carries memories that have not died. Because that's what the road has, it doesn't forget. And sometimes, she charges. Jimmy was a good driver, a loyal guy. And he died alone, on a random night, because no one was around to hear. Maybe that's why his voice still echoes there. Not for revenge. But out of necessity. For longing. Or maybe, to make sure no one else ends up in the same way. Today, when I cross that region, I don't turn off the CB. Never. I leave it on, in silence. And if I hear the voice, I respond. Even if it's just to say, I'm here. Even if he doesn't respond. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes a ghost doesn't want to scare you. You just want to be heard. You just want to know that somewhere someone still remembers. Still listens. He still respects that stretch of road that became a cemetery and a radio at the same time. So if you're driving in the early hours of the morning, and the radio makes more noise than it should, listen carefully. And if someone asks for help near the curve, even if it's just a disembodied voice, they respond. Because sometimes, what comes from beyond, is not meant to scare. It's to remember that the road, no matter how lonely it is, never forgets those who got lost on it.